The not-for-profit that's losing money would close because there's no benefactor. Sometimes private businesses are worse because there's a benefactor that has, pride, reputation, all these other things tied up in it. What they do is they subsidize these private businesses to keep them going. But as you say, there was no intentionality about the practice. There was no focus on the right things. Welcome back to the Scale My Clinic podcast. I'm really excited today to present Dr. Ben Nally. Ben is a part owner of Central General Practice in Mansfield. For those of you listening from outside of Victoria, Mansfield is 180 kilometres from Melbourne, round about 2.5 hours drive. Fabulous place, about 5,500 people, but a much bigger catchment area. It is in the Alpine region, and it's kind of the support town for Mount Buller, for those of you that are snow skiers. And it is a MMM5, which is a small rural town, is the classification for that. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here today. And we're going to go through some of the things that are involved in running a practice in a different environment. And so I'm really keen to hit you up with what's different about owning a general practice in a MMM5 area.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Well, I better say, first of all, that Mansfield's up to about 10,000 people now, not 5.5.
Right.
So
there you go.
That's what we're telling ourselves anyway. So it is a great town. You're right about that. It's a beautiful community right at the foot of Mount Buller there. Really unique town. Decent amount of affluence, decent amount of culture, strong sporting history. So, we've got the mountain on one side and then the lakes on the other. So, a little bit of everything really. But, obviously being in as you said, MMM5 region, does come with challenges. We just don't have a big pool when it comes to, I guess, recruitment, GPs, of course, but also for other staff, admin, nursing staff. It's just, obviously, we've got less population, so less of a number to pull from. And when we're asking or trying to recruit people, particularly GPs, we're asking them to make quite a significant change in their life because, they're not moving around the corner or moving from one clinic in a suburb to the next. They're kind of making quite a big life change. So that provides, obviously a challenge in recruitment in itself. We're pretty confident once we get them here that, we can sell them on the place and kind of get them, I guess, to put down roots in the community, and they tend to stay for long term, but it is probably a bit of a harder sell to begin with.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying it's a bit like the mob. Once you join, it's hard to get out. Just getting them in is the challenge.
Yeah, that's right. Make them an offer they can't refuse. That's right. So look, it is a bit of a challenge, but it's got some really great things as well. Being a small community as a GP, particularly in a small community, that you're quite well known. You are a pillar of the community. And obviously that's got a set of challenges, but I think the positives that come with that, can't be kind of counted really. So, if you enjoy being that part of the community and holding those kind of leadership positions, I think being in a small town is the place to be.
Well, no, an example of that is that you were, I'm going to say, advocating on behalf of the local hospital and how that was resourced. And so maybe let's talk a little bit about that because, as you say, there's community leadership embedded in being a GP and owning a practice is probably at the higher end of that spectrum in a small town, and some responsibilities. I'm not going to use the word obligations because what you're saying is you take them on with some pride. Maybe just do a little diversion into what that involved and what the outcome was for the lobbying and the advocacy done on behalf of the hospital.
Yeah, so we did get a bit of press. So we got a bit of national press on that one. There was a plan that was in its infancy, I believe, but to amalgamate some of the small hospital boards and the CEOs and the kind of high level management across Victoria. And our concern was that if you take away that kind of buy-in and ownership at a local level, it can have really detrimental effects on the hospital and the healthcare kind of landscape more broadly. And so we, wanted to fight tooth and nail to not allow that to happen. So we organised a series of things, quite a large Facebook group. They've got quite the following. And we organised a big town event in the centre of town. And I think we had, must 7,000 or 8,000, maybe 10,000 people there. It was packed, including a few local MPs that came out to gave their support. And like I said, a lot of local news coverage as well. So I don't know whether it was, as a direct result of that action, but, as it stands, we've kept our local board and our CEO and that kind of local ownership and control at the moment. So we're very, very happy about that.
Well, I think a good rule in life, Ben, is that anything that happens good that you've laid your hand on or been adjacent to, you should take credit for, because there'll be enough things that you get blamed for that you had nothing to do with. So you might as well take credit for that.
Yeah, 100% me. That's right.
So what I'd like to do, I just want you to talk through, and one of the things we've talked about is that the pool of people to select from, be they employees or GPs, is smaller in a more rural setting. And so I'd love to walk through, there'll be some people listening to this that are thinking, maybe ownership isn't for me, but maybe I would like to go to Mansfield and be a GP in that environment or somewhere like that. And so I really love you to just think about a GP that's come from a city or an urban environment, more urban, has moved there, and how their life changed in doing that. You mentioned some of the things that are a real positive for that. Let's just choose somebody, we won't name them, but somebody that comes to mind, or an amalgam of people, and just walk through, okay, they make this choice. Over a few years, they can expect these things to change in their life. And I hope you talk a lot about traffic and all of the things that annoy those of us in the city.
Yeah. Well, look, the lifestyle component is immense. I mean, you can't undersell that. Like just the surrounds here and the opportunities outside of work. There's endless kind of number of things to do, whether it's, mountain biking, the mountain, skiing, getting out on the lake. If you enjoy the outdoors, this is definitely the place to be. From the work perspective, we have a bit of a combination now. So we do have some GPs that work in town that are solely based in the clinic, running that, I suppose, more of a kind of a city-based GP model, which traditionally wasn't something we entertained. The kind of expectation was if you came to work in a rural area, you were the true rural generalist, so you would do all the on-call and everything. So now we've got a bit of a combination. But if you want to dip your toes into that really rural generalist area or space, there's plenty of options in Mansfield. So we have, I'm a GP anaesthetist, so I get to theatre and do support for the obstetrics and the urgent care after hours. We have a number of GPs that work on the on-call roster in the urgent care, which is a really quite a busy and thriving urgent care now. It's not uncommon that we have to call in the chopper from Melbourne to transport someone out, intubate people on site and then have them sent to Melbourne. And like I said, we run obstetrics as well. So we have a number of GP obstetricians in town, and they run a pretty, successful obstetric service that I think we're up to about, we're 70 or 80 births a year at the moment and looking to expand. So, and that's been running for many years, over many, many years. So if you want to come to Mansfield and you want to work as a GP just in clinic, definitely that's an option. But, if you want to get your hands dirty and you want to see that more rural generalist side of medicine, then definitely there's options as well. So.
Yeah, and so you're responsible, your clinic, for taking it from 5,500 to 10,000 people then with the 80 new arrivals per year.
That's right. Yeah, future workforce stuff. That's right.
Exactly. And so I think this is really important for people to understand, because one of the barriers to people moving to more rural locations is thinking that they need to take on, all of it. And as you say, that did used to be the circumstance. But what you're saying now is, look, you can start with something that you're more familiar with, and you can expand into those other areas as your expertise and comfort with those improves. There aren't that many places in an urban setting where you can do such comprehensive medicine. And I think that that's a really rewarding part of true cradle to grave care. Let's make a transition into ownership. And I think the best way to think of this as owners for anything is that we're stewards. At some point in time, we hand it off to somebody else. We have to have succession plans in place. In a more rural settings, typically practices change hands rather than new ones kind of getting built and old ones getting closed. And so it would be really useful to talk through transitions of ownership, maybe talk about your current business partner a little bit as well, and just what lessons you have to share from transitions in ownership. And I always like to think, if someone's listening, what would be the quicksand? Like, what are the things that you're like, yeah, I tried this thing, didn't work out that well. My advice is don't do this or do it in a different way. What comes to mind there for you, Ben?
Yeah, so I think, the important distinction, as you said, is that it's quite different buying into an existing clinic that has a long, rich history as opposed to starting something anew. And so in our instance, we bought into a clinic that had been operational for 30 plus years, really had served the community for a long time. And as you well know, the landscape of general practice and Medicare has changed, well, perhaps not changed in some ways to keep up with certain areas. So that raised a whole kind of series of challenges for us, because there were really great elements of CGP that we bought into, particularly the culture and the service of the community and putting the patient first. But there were some challenges as well. That the clinic never really ran with a strong kind of business viewpoint. It was probably more altruistic, almost running like a not-for-profit or a charity. And so, we wanted to embrace the positive parts and keep that really strong culture, but simultaneously moving it to more of that business model. And I think that meant that we did a lot of things. It felt very chaotic to begin with, but we had to be particularly careful not to go too fast, too quickly. I think that adage of go fast and break things, it didn't always help with us.
Especially when they're your neighbours and your kids are playing soccer together or basketball together.
That's right. That's right. And so we had to do it in a really slow and measured way. So, we took all the staff and the community along for the ride, and we had to do a really big kind of education piece around, why we were doing things, and, and the fact that getting more GPs to town meant we had to update, meant we had to consider private billing, meant we had to do a renovation of the clinic. All our systems got changed. There was just so much that we kind of undertook, but it was all for that purpose of building the workforce and servicing the community.
And maybe give a snapshot of kind of where you began when you first took ownership and where the business is now, just based on whatever kind of metrics are most useful. It might be GP hours, it might be the volume of patients. What are the things that would give people an understanding that are watching or listening to this about what change you've enacted? And it'd be great to get an example of one of those things that you're like, I pushed a bit hard and I had to back off and just take a different way.
Well, the place was in the red, I guess, when we bought in. So it was definitely not making money. I think we had 2.5 to 3 FTE when we bought in, number of kind of part-timers. And we were running on ZMed. There was, kind of little to no ownership meetings in place, using the local accountant, no regular cadence of clinical meetings. There was a lot of elements like that needed to be optimized. So we just kind of, under the guidance of you guys and Project X, we picked some key projects where we thought we could get small wins to begin with. Negotiating the pathology lease was a massive one. I still remember sitting down with my previous business owner, who was the long-term owner, and suggested of what we might be able to get for pathology, and he laughed me out of the room. And we exceeded that number by quite a margin. So we were pretty happy with that. Credit card surcharge, all those little things that we felt we could implement pretty quickly. We did just pick a project, we're putting out fires everywhere. But then, it did get to a point where I particularly realized that we needed to transition to be a little bit more intentional and forward thinking with our planning, not be so reactive. I've taken a number of swings at trying to implement the EOS system or a version of it. And I think finally, we're starting to get some traction there, no pun intended. But I had many attempts at trying to get that off the ground, and it just failed every time. And it wasn't until I went to, and I think I went to the EOS conference recently and took a couple of leadership team along, and now I'm watching them, start to implement these systems and really see the value of it. That I realized I was trying to implement this from the top down and probably skipping over the real education piece and letting people kind of develop the systems themselves. So I think we're starting to move in the right direction there, which is great.
Awesome. And you mentioned, so I think one thing that's important to flag here is, we often joke about not-for-profits, and I make this joke as well, but a not-for-profit that's losing money would close because there's no benefactor. And so sometimes private businesses are worse because there's a benefactor that has, pride, reputation, all these other things tied up in it. What they do is they subsidize these private businesses to keep them going. But as you say, there was no intentionality about the practice. There was no focus on the right things. And that's often just for a variety of reasons. People are not sure what to do. They just get a little bit beaten down by the reality sometimes of what's happening. You mentioned it was 2.3 FTE at the start, thereabouts, when you bought in. What is it? Where are things now? What's different about the practice now? If I walked in there and I saw the old version versus this version, what's different with it? How many doctors are there? What are the things that come to mind that can help paint a picture for those that don't know?
Yeah, so we're up to 14 GPs now, looking hopefully to be 15 by early next year. And our FTE would be up around the 8.5 now, which is great. So that's a much bigger organisation now than what it used to be, and the complexity certainly started to go up. So that's been fantastic. And I think the second thing you would notice if you walked in, so the clinic in town is in a 100-year-old building, that typical little cottage style clinic. We undertook a massive renovation and expansion that we completed about almost 12 months ago to the day. And that would be one of the biggest things that you would notice walking into our clinic these days. It's a spectacular, beautiful space to be in. And that's the comment we get, over and over again. Had a registrar that came for a tour with his wife only a couple of weeks ago, and he made the comment that I don't think I'll be able to go into any other clinic after this one. So that's and honestly, I don't think I realised the importance of having such a great space to work in, and how much of an effect it can have on your on your mood and your day. So that's one of our biggest selling points, and something that we're certainly trying to show off as much as we can at the moment.
That's fascinating, Ben. And the reality is, it's difficult to imagine doing that kind of thing when you're in that state that you described originally, because unfortunately a business that's losing money looks a bit tired, feels a bit tired. It causes you to develop a bit more of a scarcity mindset. And so it takes a bit of reinforcement to develop a proper growth mindset, as Carol Dweck would say. And so that's a real key learning that comes along the way with little successes. And from a community perspective, imagine the impact on the community and the catchment area that is around Mansfield, which is really large, from going from two and a bit GPs to 8.5 full-time equivalent, 14, 15 GPs. That's epic. And I just want to applaud you and Daniela for doing that work and building it to that kind of a state. Did you get any feedback from the prior owner who's a GP? And obviously, I always think of things like we're working on the shoulders of giants. Things need to be renovated and improved, but if it didn't exist, it would be very hard to do this bit. Has he said anything about, wow, I didn't think it could become this? Like, is there any kind of part of his brain that's been completely shocked by what you've been able to achieve?
I think there would be, definitely. I mean, to his credit, he definitely came on that journey with us. He was keen. He recognised that we needed to do an extension of some kind. I don't think he had in his mind, what we ended up with. There was the initial plans to just put on this extra space, maybe whack some paint here, and we'll be done. Whereas I was very keen to do the whole place, because the existing part needed an upgrade as well. And so, but I think going back to that, honouring the history and the culture piece, as a good example, my business partner Will, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me mentioning him. He had art spread throughout the whole of the old clinic, like art that he's collected over 30 plus years. And so one of the biggest things that I made sure was really important to maintain was how we're going to bring this art back into the clinic once it's all renovated. So, and I think we couldn't have done that in a better way. So we've selected the best pieces. It's all throughout the clinic. And then we've got a little sneaky salon wall gallery down one corner of the clinic. So if you peek your head around the corner, there'd be probably 30 or so paintings all hung together. And that combined effect is quite impressive. So little things like that, I think, again, we struck that balance of maintaining that history and culture, but modernising and being a place where, you know, the kind of new crop of GPs want to work.
Yeah, that's a beautiful element. And I think, as you say, you know, it really is just about taking what's been given and how do you layer improvements on top of that without discarding the bits that are really valuable. So that's a great share. I wanted to touch on one thing that people listening might not know. EOS is the Entrepreneurial Operating System, and it is something that was created by Gino Wickman. There's a book called Traction, which is what Ben was talking about. If you're listening to this, I strongly encourage you to read that book, but do not try and implement those things necessarily. They might not be the highest priority for you in your business right now, but it is still something that's really valuable. And when you've got a business at the size that Ben's is at the moment, then it is certainly something that is super valuable and something that we coach as well in Scale My Clinic, a simplified version of EOS. And Ben, what I'd like to come back to now is you've had that journey of growth. How long did it take you to go from where you were to 2.3 GPs to now sort of 14, 15 GPs? What time frame are we talking about?
So we're 6, almost 7 years into the journey now. We joined up with Project X in, I think it was 2020, just around kind of COVID time. And we'd been in ownership for probably about 18 months prior. So yeah, it's taken, 6 or 7 years to kind of get to where we are now. Don't get me wrong, we've still got a long, long way to go. But yeah, we're certainly thrilled from where we were. And I think what you were saying about the EOS, like, if nothing else, just got to have some kind of framework, some kind of system that you're following. That's what we found. And it was pretty scratchy and it was pretty rough to begin with, but just got to try and implement some system and some framework to what you're doing.
Yeah, and it's about communication and, as you say, structure and honouring what you commit to, following through on that. I think that's kind of the things that I hear regularly from people, that they make a commit to, say, a meeting or a certain amount of time to invest in something, then those times just get shifted, moved, or downgraded, and that becomes an issue. Let's jump to some of the, what you believe in this experience over 5, 6, 7 years. What are the key foundations to running a successful general practice, irrespective of where people might be located? What are the things that you think people need to be addressing, Ben? What are the lessons that you would like to share with others?
I could talk about the accountants that we brought on board. I could talk about using Cubico, changing to best practice, implementing Hot Doc. I could talk about all those things, but honestly, I think for me, it's the people that are the biggest thing. We've had some amazing people in, our leadership positions, but also throughout the whole clinic, and people that I implicitly trust as well, which I think is massive. We had Katie Moore, who was our practice manager for a few years when we started the journey, and Katie Todd, and she was immense at getting some of these kind of processes and systems in place, and really came on that kind of early journey with us. And now we've transitioned to Carly and Dempsey, our kind of leadership team, so business ops and kind of operations, and they're fantastic. And they just require little oversight. They just can do. They've really got that growth mindset. And again, we kind of trust them 100%. So I think the systems, the programs and everything, I mean, that's great and it helps, but the people's where it's at, like, massive.
Absolutely. And Lencioni's 5 functions of a team, trust is the foundational layer. And so having that right means that you can get to doing all of the other layers there and adding value. I think that's a really good lesson, because sometimes people, again, it can be really easy when you've got no profit or a very small profit to not want to reinvest in people. And that can create a barrier to growth because it's all dependent on you. You can be the bottleneck. Do you have a philosophy around how you pay people, how you invest in these great people, and how you find these great people that you think might be valuable for people to hear?
Well, don't be afraid to pay overs. That's for sure. Um, I think, look, the workforce outside of GP specifically, but your support teams and your nursing, it's so competitive these days. Our local hospital, for example, traditionally paid so much more to work as a nurse there as what we could really afford at the clinic level. So, you want to obviously pay people what they're worth and give them something to strive for. But there's other elements that we kind of look at as well. What kind of work life or work balance, what kind of flexibility we can offer, working from home. We're really family friendly. So if one of the team needs to bring their little one into the clinic because they can't get care, we embrace that. All those little touches that make our place a really nice and great place to work. It's not just about the numbers necessarily. So that's, we try and embrace that philosophy, and I think it pays off.
Yeah, well, you don't get to build big, high-performing teams without having a really aligned and magnetic culture, and so, well done on that. That's awesome, and it does take high-performing people to get you from where you were to where you are now. I'd love to jump to working with hospitals. What are your learnings and lessons with working with hospitals? We heard earlier how you had to step in and defend their autonomy. Of course, there's competition for local services. You just talked about that. How have you done that, and what lessons do you have that you could share?
Well, our example, the bond between the two clinics in town and the hospitals has always been very strong. Like traditionally, all the GPs that have worked within the clinics do work in the hospital. But, it's had to change pretty dramatically over the years as well. I mean, back in the day, it used to be that you'd be on call, you'd be fully booked in the clinic, and you'd also be on call for the hospital. So you'd have to run up to the hospital to try and see patients in between your other patients. You're on call for the 24 hours. You probably rarely got home before midnight or 1 a.m, or sometimes you were just there the whole night. So obviously we realized that kind of work level and burden needed to change. So the hospital have been great at trying to come along that journey with us. But, at the end of the day, we're a private business, and they're a public health service. And so often our priorities are very different. Our funding models are very different. And then just how we run, as a kind of operational business is very different. So trying to align those, I guess, elements is quite tricky at times. I don't think the hospital quite, gets that a GP being out of the clinic means that, the clinic kind of sacrifices revenue for that day, but the GP still gets paid, little things like that. So just trying to have open discussion with them and, because at the end of the day, we're all in it for the same reason. We're all in it to provide a quality health service to the Mansfield and broader community. So as long as our kind of values and our kind of goals align, then hopefully, we can navigate the other challenges.
Absolutely. Ben, as somebody who's had some experience in running the practice over a period of time and taking it from where it was to a substantially bigger operation, do you have some advice for general practice owners that are listening and they're kind of frustrated with the performance of where they are? So maybe they're more like where you were when you began, small number of doctors, overcommitted, really stressful environment and an unsustainable business at that point in time. What are the first 2 or 3 things that you think those people need to be doing? What should they be thinking about? It doesn't matter whether it's urban or rural environment. What should people be, what actions should they be taking?
A little bit of introspection probably helps. Like, you've got to recognize that you are the leader and that, you've got to kind of walk the walk and you've got to set the example for the team. So a little bit of introspection for sure. But I think, as we said, that just picking some small wins, I mean, it's all about momentum. So you've just got to get some small wins and runs on the board. So just pick the things that you can kind of change and implement with the least resistance and with some kind of meaningful return. So, pick a few wins, get some momentum, and then ensure that you have quality people around you. Because trying to do it all yourself or shoulder the burden all yourself, one way street to burnout, as we all know. So I think, trying to share the load, get people aligned for some common goals and just take some small wins to get that momentum.
Yep, that's fantastic advice. And what about if there's somebody sitting there thinking, You know what? I think Ben's pretty awesome and he's done really well there. I might actually get in and look to buy a practice or take over a practice in a MMM5 or similar environment. What advice would you have for that person that's not yet an owner, but they're thinking about getting into something like what you're doing now?
Oh, definitely pick an area or a place where you want to actually live, where you want to be part of the community. I think trying to own a clinic and operate a clinic in a community like ours would be very hard if you weren't embedded in the community. I think you've got to spend time within the community, understand who the key stakeholders are within that kind of ecosystem. So I think, if nothing else, you've got to pick a spot that you really would love to live. If you've got family, definitely have a look at the schools, just all those really crucial things, even before thinking about the clinic itself. There's challenges in certainly in operating in a rural health setting, but the rewards of being part of that kind of community and having a really big influence over kind of health and the health of your community, it's fantastic. So.
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, you're talking about the change in GP numbers. Really, you're making a 7 times bigger impact in your local community, and I think access to health services is a big reason why people might not choose to go to less populous areas. And so the impact that makes on people moving to the area, because they're, they'll talk about that. Schooling is one thing they'll talk about, but they'll also talk about the quality of care that you get through general practice and the local hospital. And so I really commend you and Danielle and Will on the work that you've done, Will, over a great many years up until recently as an owner, and you and Danielle in getting it from where it is now to where it was to where it is now. I really appreciate you coming and having a chat about it, Ben. It was really cool working with you guys. It was really enjoyable seeing the changes that you've made to the practice, and that's not just the physical environment, but the team. Closing words for anybody listening into the sort of things they need to be thinking about doing as an owner.
Well, if you're not a member of Project X already, you should be, Todd. No, I think, look, you guys were fantastic. Just having, and when I say you guys, I mean, the Project X team, but also the broader community, just understanding that, there's other GPs and clinic owners that are in exactly the same spot that you are. I certainly had a strong sense of imposter syndrome when I look around at some of these clinic owners across the country and just how awesome they were and how well they were doing, and had to do some introspection myself just to try and push through that and realize that, well, we don't have to get everything right, but let's just get moving. Let's do the work. Let's go on the journey. And somewhere along the way, I think we found our groove. So I would, definitely like to thank you guys, but also like just that broader community, just being able to lean on them and get inspiration from them. That was just everything, really.
Yeah, I think, Ben, it just reminds me of that. I know Stephen Covey didn't first use the quote, but being the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, it's really important to spend your time around people that have like goals and similar environments so you can learn from them. And one thing you talked about is really important. You can kind of take 2 things away from an environment. If you see people, like imagine your younger self saw where you are now, they might find it intimidating. Or the other message is, well, if they can do it, I can do it too. And I just need to play the right game to step up and not try and do everything at once. That's probably the key thing. Ben, I'm grateful for you. Thank you for investing some time with me. If you're somebody who loves snow sports and you'd like some seasonal work and you're just a GP, or you really like to suss out Mansfield and the wider environs, make sure you hit up Ben. We'll make sure his contact details are in the show notes. We'll see you next time on the Scale My Clinic podcast. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.